Hi. So, one of the most important elements of fiction and short story and novels as well is the narrator and the point of view. These are two sort of distinct things, but very closely related. The narrator is who is speaking, who is telling the tale or the short story. The narrator can be single, the narrator can be multiple people. It can change in the course of of a particular work. Generally, with short stories, the narrator stays consistent because it's such a short form. Um, so the narrator is, literally the person who is telling the story, and then the point of view is really the pronoun that the writer uses and the vantage point that the writer is using to tell that story. Now you'll see that it can be broken down into a few different options using different pronouns. The first is the first person narrator, who would be a person speaking, who is witnessing what is happening or the events of the story, or the events are actually happening to that person. They have a sort of limited view of what is going on, so you're seeing everything from their perspective. I gave as an example David Copperfield, which is a novel by Charles Dickens about a fictional young man and his life growing up, and the novel begins, whether I shall turn out to be the hero of my own life or whether that station will be held by anybody else, these pages must show. I find that to be an incredibly profound statement about life, and we all have to figure out whether we're going to be the hero of our own journey or not. And then the second example I have is from a novel. This is in the second person, which uses you in the singular, or it would use we in the plural. And that is the relatively new novel called You by Caroline Kepnes, which delineates the sort of spiraling down of a man who's a stalker and obsessive and ultimately a serial killer. And that novel begins, you walked into the bookstore, you were careful to make sure the door didn't slam, and he's observing this girl that he's going to ultimately stalk and torture. And with the second person, you feel like you're sort of in between characters. It's very interesting form. And then third person, which is the one we're probably the most familiar with, has a couple of different approaches. One could be the omniscient third person narrator, where the narrator is all seeing and all knowing and is kind of like giving us the bird's eye view of what's happening. But often there's a close third person where the narrator almost seems to be like sitting on the character's shoulder, and sort of partly in their, understanding what's happening in their psychology, but also partly able to observe other things happening in the world. And as an example, I gave you Franz Kafka's opening line to Metamorphosis, which is, as Gregor Samsa awoke one morning from uneasy dreams, he found himself transformed in his bed into a gigantic insect. So you know a little bit that he's had dreams, and they've been uneasy, but you don't totally know. You're getting an outside perspective of him, and you can imagine him awaking and thinking that he's a giant insect, or that he really is a giant insect. So that for the narrator, and a little more in a bit